It's the only place I use that font. Helpful. Staring me down. Watch you.
You're just the best speaker songs I've heard.
Yeah, that's the best speaker.
I think we'll get started then. Yeah, it's 3 o'clock, so I'll get started. All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Sounds a little bit weird. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. All right, thanks for coming out. So this is, if you haven't already realized it, the 3 p.m. track 1 slot for Clear as FUD. So I'm going to get started since it is 1 after 3. So a little bit about me. You guys might have seen me in the last couple of days, so you might already know who I am. My name is Christopher Madalena. You can find me as C. Madalena on IRC and Twitter. You might know me from MySec. I do some of the recording for MySec Jackson. So we put up the videos or presentations and up on YouTube. I also usually, for the last several conferences or so, like CityCon, here I've been helping out with Adrian with the video recording, so you often see me chained to a table with a laptop like Sam over here. Everyone give Sam a clap. So, just a couple of quick notes about me, if there's any interest in it. I have a bachelor's degree in information security and intelligence from Ferris State, and I've been working as an information security consultant at esentire. I've been there about 3 months, and I primarily do project management, phishing, working with vulnerability assessments, reporting, that sort of thing. And I've spent the last 10 years in IT, not necessarily in security, but always in customer-facing roles. Even as a consultant right now, I'm always interacting with customers. So everything I do is centered around trying to figure out how to communicate with various different types of people. And that's really the core of what I want to talk about today. So what we're going to talk about is how users understand technology, how this is going to be influenced by media and their daily lives, and how this impacts things like themselves, the security field, and we're going to then look at a few real-world examples near the end. So just kind of quick disclaimer, kind of the standard boilerplate one. This is, these are all my opinions and views, not those of my employer. So with training and education, we give users training, and when I say users, I'm referring basically to everyone. The people in this room, all the way down to people who can hardly use a tablet. Anyone is an end user if they take a product and they use it. So you end up getting training, whether that's you read a manual, someone tells you how to do it, you get training. But oftentimes when we refer to things like training, we're referring to things that are often aged, outdated, documents or courses you can take that run you through a couple of quick tips. Like, here's the things you should look for in an email to make sure you're not being phished. But they're often very focused. They need to be efficient because they don't want to take too much time out of your workday, so they tell you very specific things. Look for these types of links in the email. Look for this sort of wording. Look for a typo. You might be being phished. They don't actually tell you how to look at an email header or how to really dig into it if you need to investigate yourself, if you're not sure. They give you very specific things to look at. So if you don't understand why you're looking for any of that stuff or why it matters, you don't actually really learn anything. You're not actually being educated. You're just being trained to act a very specific way. So education is different in that it actually explains why you should care about something, why it's relevant to you. And that's really key, because when you actually understand why something matters, you'll actually carry that with you and be able to apply it elsewhere. Makes learning about other things a lot easier. So I'd be kind of a hypocrite if I didn't tell you why this is relevant to you then. So it kind of gets summed up in this quote from a journalist that I like, Quinn Norton. If you've seen her on Twitter or she usually gets posted on Medium and some various magazines. In an article she wrote a few months ago called "Everything is Broken." Computers and computing are broken. They're not necessarily broken always in the way we think of something as being broken, but everything we have from our phones, laptops, tablets, they're all built on fundamental pieces of technology that all create the whole. So these little pieces of technology are all broken in their own little way. They all have little bugs. They all have little problems in them. The people who actually understand that technology, who have been educated and understand why something's happening, they can cope with it. They can figure it out. They can work through it. But if you're just training someone on how to use something, they don't understand how to work through those problems. And everything we have is broken in lots of little ways that we work around it every day. Even email hasn't been changed in decades. It's still kind of broken. It's very limited. But we use it because it works. But those of us that understand how email works and why it works the way it does are better able to cope, actually make email clients, things like that, that will improve upon it. But you have people who just kind of understand email is this thing that I click the button, it sends an email, and that's what happens. There's a fundamental difference there. So the really great thing that we've seen recently is in the last few years, we've had kind of a really boon in technology where people who used to struggle to use a PC are now able to get a tablet, something with a touch screen that's constantly connected to the internet, and they're able to branch out. Where normally they would be maybe just stuck with email and looking at Facebook, they're now actually able to break out of their little silos they used to be in and start exploring. They see links on social media sites, they get sent something in an email, they just hear about something, they can download an app, they can start to branch out and really start to explore the internet, which is really great. There's nothing that's not wonderful about that, because they can learn, they can get out there, they can find things that entertain them, they can reach out to communities that they wouldn't otherwise be able to be a part of. It's really great. So they have this ease of use through the touch screens, these tablets they can get, their phones, and they have the motivation to get out there, which is all their friends and family on social media, etc. Of course, the problem is that they don't really understand any of the technology. So this leads to them being really easy targets for scams. They might recklessly expose personal information by just overly disclosing on a website, providing information they don't need, just posting it somewhere, trying to be helpful, telling someone something. And not to mention then they have all these devices that are constantly connected with all their information on it. They don't really understand what anyone might be able to do with that information. So they don't lock the phone, they don't keep things encrypted, etc. If they lose that device, it puts them at risk. Nothing might come from it, but that device is out there now somewhere. They're at a risk of having their information exposed. And kind of the big thing that I want to talk about is it enables a fear of the unknown. They don't understand, going back to that education point, they don't understand why something is and why it's relevant to them. So when they start to hear things from the media or even from entertainment, anything from friends and family that they don't actually understand, they don't have the education to apply to push against it, they start to come up with their own ideas. They get these fears, the little seeds of fear they don't understand, and they come to conclusions that might be incorrect. And a lot of that comes from news and programming. So I kind of refer to this as counter-programming. And it comes in a lot of different ways. Like, I'm kind of picking on CSI Cyber here, as kind of we are wont to do. Obviously, everyone understands shows like CSI Cyber. You're kind of hard-pressed to find someone who believes everything that's going on any of the CSI programs is real. But what it does do is create kind of a gray area where can't really speak for everyone in the room, but I know I've had situations where I've been sitting down with a family member or friend, with something like this on the TV, and they turn and they ask me, like, well, you really can't do something like that, right? And they're asking it in a joking way. They don't believe that whatever crazy nonsense just happened on the TV could really happen with a computer, but they understand, and they've been told that computers are becoming, we have so much research going into it, they're kind of going forward at such a rate that they know that maybe that some part of that's possible, but they don't know where the reality stops and the show started. So if you don't sit there and actually explain to them, no, here's where the limits are, here's what actually could have been done, and here's where they went off in fantasy land, they kind of start drawing their own line, and that starts to get a little bit wavy and moves back and forth, where they start to think things that aren't really possible or would be ridiculous, just so ridiculously low that they would ever happen. They start to believe that that's the reality, and that can kind of start to create these fears where they want to stay away from technology, or they start telling people other things, and kind of that viewpoint begins to be propagated. Excuse me. And then we have various news articles that do a lot of the same thing. So I have a couple of headlines up here that jumped out at me from 2015 and 2014. One being from back in December the Washington Post. We're actually going to talk about this in a little bit more depth later. They did a Q&A with the hackers who helped break into Sony's network, or supposedly, anyways. And then, which is just kind of full of a lot of really bad information, and we're actually going to get to that in a later slide. But then we have a couple of articles that there was really no reason for them to exist, other than they wanted to put something up about it. And one of those was a New York Times article that was just called "Snowden Used Low-Cost Tools to Best NSA," which kind of on its own is quite a statement to say. But then it was full of a lot of scare quotes. They basically put scare quotes around anything that would be unfamiliar to a regular user, like wget. There was so many quotes in there, it looked like they were referring to all kinds of crazy tools and things that Snowden used that we would recognize as common everyday things we might use in our own jobs and scripts, etc. But to the user, to the person reading that article, they're weird foreign things. And the article didn't really add anything, didn't explain what any of those tools are, didn't explain how they worked, and didn't really provide any information or education. It just existed to make this statement, which was basically summed up in the headline. And then you had this Forbes article that focused a lot on people like the Grug and others like him, and they decided to go with the kind of sensationalist headline of "Meet the hackers who sell spies the tools to crack your PC and get paid six-figure fees." Which, if you're familiar with that article, comes complete with a picture of the Grug with a bag full of money at his feet. So what this all leads to is warped touchstones and warped facts. So what touchstones should do is actually aid in communication. They should be really weighty words. If I say the word hack to you, you kind of already understand what I'm talking about. At least in context of our conversation, you understand I'm probably talking about something related to computers. But when words start getting used or misused, and that kind of starts to become subjective whether or not they're really being misused, because words can change. If a word begins to change, we continue to use the word as we think of it, and no one else thinks of it that way, there's really no point in it. It's not aiding communication anymore, it's actually just hurting it. It's putting up a wall between us and them, which a lot of users now don't understand what the word hack actually means. They don't understand what it is. It's too broad. So when we say hack, they think of one thing while we actually mean another. And there's all kinds of examples like this that then eventually lead to a communication breakdown when you're trying to educate the user because we're not using the language that they use. And everything ends up kind of couched in this ideas, all these ideas they have from watching CSI, from reading the New York Times, things like that, none of which on their own is really bad, but since they don't actually have any education to back it up and no one's explaining to them, we end up with this really hazy idea of what technology is and what it can offer. They get a really incomplete picture. And I've been picking on things like CSI and the news, but it's not just that. It's this kind of misinformation is out there in all kinds of forms. Like this is an actual, error message from Spotify, the Windows client that just for no reason at all just suggests maybe you've been infected by a virus and that's what broke Spotify. I don't know, But then doesn't offer anything other than just please re-download Spotify. It doesn't offer any information about perhaps getting rid of this virus, why it would suggest that, anything at all. It just decides to throw that out there and leave it alone. Just leave it hanging there for the user to ponder. So I want to take a quick history lesson on the word hack. We've mentioned that words can change when they get used a certain way enough. And hack is actually a word that changed quite a bit in a pretty short amount of time. It started off in the 1300s as referring to a laborer or workhorse that was hired for rough work. It's kind of the idea of you hack up some wood. It was that kind of idea. And then after about a couple hundred years, it started referring to kind of the idea of like turning prostitute, of becoming someone you could be hired for some kind of work. It was used to refer to a lame horse for a long time. It became used to refer to cabbies. Eventually, it was used as kind of an insult. It was about the 1800s. It was you're a hack. This work is hack nigh, that kind of thing. And then in the 60s and 70s, it started being used, according to some MIT students at the time, that they started referring to it as pranksters, or a tinkerer, with the tinkerer, prankster being the hacker. And obviously, around that time, then it started being applied to computers. But then, eventually, it only took a few years after that for it to be used negatively to refer to someone who, without permission, accesses computer systems. And ever since then, there's been this back and forth of, no, hackers is a good thing. We really like the word hacker because it has a lot of flavor, it has history. But it's being used in a very negative term by everyone else. And when nothing's done about that, it's kind of the majority ends up winning. Because over time, a word will change, and the accepted meaning of that word will change. Kind of the same thing's happening right now with the word cyber. So this is kind of a quote I like from Alex Stamos, the CISO of Yahoo. Says, if the word's on a patch, you've probably already lost. And I like this for a couple of reasons, because one, it demonstrates the idea that he obviously looks at as cyber as something to fight against. That this word is so awful, we should be fighting against it, but we've probably already lost because it's being used, for government agencies. But at the same time, this is a word that is just being used a lot. It'll probably change again in 50 years. It might mean something totally different, or it might just be a totally accepted term. And this idea that whether or not a hacker is a good thing or a bad thing, or what some of these words mean, has been going on for decades now. These are a couple excerpts from the, Clifford Stoll's The Cuckoo Egg. If you've read that, this was written back in 1989. Even here, he refers to how the old style software wizards like to call themselves hackers, and that they kind of take some insult to the idea that a few morons are taking that and spoiling the name and running off with it. So even back in 1989, this was already kind of a thing that was being discussed out there, and there's been a lot of talks on it. Lots of podcasts discuss whether or not how we should try to change the word hacker, but it's been going on since '89 at least. And since the days of MIT where they started using the word, it's been this back and forth. So, what exactly even is a hack today? It's really pretty nebulous. Excuse me. So, this is just obviously a quick XKCD comic you guys have probably seen before that I like. But it really demonstrates the point that people look at the word hack and they actually think of it as this thing that means someone attacked something and brought something down, when if a website is hacked, then it really just kind of means someone tore a poster down that the CIA put up. No one really hacked the CIA. It really changes the meaning depending on how you put it. You can say you hacked the CIA, but if it was just their website and all you did was deface it, is that really the right way to word that? And we saw a lot of that coming out when the U.S. Central Command Twitter account was defaced. When tons and tons of headlines saying that CENTCOM had been hacked, when of course it had not been. It was just someone figured out the password. And as everyone's favorite Twitter account tweeted out around that time, knowing someone's password is apparently hacking. So, and that's kind of what it's come to. That's what hack kind of means now. It's anything involving a computer that you broke a rule using a computer, you hacked something. We don't think of it that way, but that's the way the word's being used. And it leads to a lot of problems like this. These are some headlines from around the time that the Lizard Squad was particularly active with, being kind of tied to the Sony Motion Pictures hack, and also to the DDoS against Blizzard Battle.net, Microsoft Xbox Live, and the Sony PlayStation Network. And just searching for, I wanted to see what someone would see if they were just a regular person, picked up the Detroit Free Press, and saw that there was some group called the Lizard Squad hacking Sony. So they go search for Lizard Squad hack Sony, and they get all these articles that just kind of refer to this really nebulous information about the Lizard Squad performing righteous hacks, on the behalf of Korea against Sony Motion Pictures, and how they're taking down, Sony's PlayStation Network and, Xbox Live. When really these were very, very different things. None of these articles mention the fact that any link between Lizard Squad and Korea and Sony Motion Pictures, or let alone Korea and Sony Motion Pictures hack, was hardly existent. But that didn't matter because they got really cool headlines out of it. And speaking of headlines, this was an excerpt from that Washington Post article I mentioned at the top of the talk, where they reached out and they wanted to interview a couple of people from Lizard Squad. So the journalist knew enough that he's like, well, it's a kind of nebulous group of people out there. We don't really know who's in it. So I should find some way to... remember, this guy's an end user, just like anyone else. He's like, well, I need to figure out a way to verify who they are. So he asked the guy to post something from the Lizard Squad Twitter account. So what the guy did, and everyone else saw it, was made a new Twitter account, had one tweet, and all it was a tweet to the guy saying, "Hi, I am who I say I am." And he had just changed one letter in the name. Used the same profile picture, put in the same profile. The guy looked at it, said, "Okay, cool, yeah, you are who you say you are," and he deleted the account. So he was tricked really, really easily, basically by, what would be similar to a phishing campaign. And then he proceeded to interview the guy and ask him totally serious questions as if he knew what he was talking about. And he just gets really wrapped up in it. If you read the article, he gets kind of into it. He wants to know more. And he gets to this part near the end where the guy's just really kind of making fun of Sony and Microsoft. Like, yeah, they can't do anything to stop us. It's really funny. And he starts comparing it to a game of chess. And so the guy says, like, well, all right, well, what do you think the counter move will be? And he makes these awesome statements, like the fact that Sony decided that they couldn't stand against themselves, so they hired Prolexic for DDoS protection. They did a totally normal thing, but he phrased it in a way as like, well, they gave up. They couldn't even stand against it, so they had to get outside help. And when he asked, like, well, Microsoft did, he goes, well, there's nothing, they really can't stop us. It doesn't look like they're even trying. And there was, not a lot of very nice comments on this, and most of the people that read it seemed to kind of see through it and, called the guy out. It never got taken down. There was no retraction. There was never any clarification from the journalists. I looked, I couldn't find anything from the Washington Post saying that they were going to release any kind of additional statements. And what this creates is a cause and effect problem. So if users start to become afraid of hackers and anyone who is like them, all because they don't understand the technology, they don't understand actually what's going on behind the attacks, then that starts putting lawmakers under pressure, who are also end users and also have, in many cases, the same lack of knowledge. They get put under pressure to start crushing the hackers. And they just seem so darn elusive. There's so many of them, and not to mention the fact that they're often portrayed as these, groups of teenagers and kids out there, causing problems for large corporations and, creating hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in damages, so on and so forth. So obviously there's going to be public outcry. And then there's the age-old problem of the elected officials wanting to appear like they're actually they're trying, and you can't really blame them for that. So what we start seeing are things like the proposed changes to the CFAA, things like Rapid7 being put under some pressure to change the Metasploit Pro licensing. Like if you saw that when they announced at RSA that now if you want to buy Metasploit Pro and you're outside of North America, you have to submit a letter explaining why you need the license, all because it has encryption in it. There's all these weird little things that are happening that are slowly causing problems for security researchers and that we're trying to fight against. And the way I see it, this is my opinion, but I feel that the root cause is because there's a base misunderstanding of how any of the technology works, which we say all the time, but we're not addressing the problem by actually trying to educate the users. And that gets compounded by the fact that then the media, who are also end users with the same amount of education, get really wrapped up in corporate training and enterprise security. They're talking about, what happens to companies. They're talking about what happens when, X service goes down, how that affects the users, things like that, but they're not actually focusing on providing users any kind of frame of reference for how these affect them. Because it's not just whether or not your ISP is getting DDoSed and maybe your internet connection gets flaky for a while or goes down. There's, PCs might become part of a botnet. They might lose PII. There's all kinds of nasty things that can happen. A lot of users are still wrapped up in the idea, and this is something that I saw a lot, especially when I worked closely with customers at a software company. I would see all types of people, and a lot of them still believe that when we would see indications that they probably had some malware on their machine, and we would let them know and how to fix it, they would often tell us, like, well, no, I don't think that's true, because I have semantic endpoint protection installed, so that's going to protect me from most things, and I wouldn't know it because I'm not seeing a bunch of pop-ups. Like, they were still kind of looking back to almost like malware from the 90s, where they know, like, oh, my machine's really slow. I'm getting a bunch of pop-ups. Crap, I have a virus. If they don't see that, they start to believe, like, oh, no, I'm fine. If anything funny is going on my computer, is probably something else. They don't recognize that this affects them at home. And that kind of brings me to some of our real-world examples. This lack of understanding leaves them wide open to things like ransomware. And I want to show this. These are really, really ugly, but that's kind of the point I want to make, is that if you look on the left, this is CryptoLocker 1.0. This was the first one that came out. It's really ugly. It doesn't, who on earth would even look at that and believe that if they paid up, anything would happen that was good? Like, it doesn't look legitimate. There's no way for them to prove that they've, encrypted your files or anything. It's really hard for the user to understand. It's obviously successful enough that they switched over, and this is CryptoLocker 2.0. And I think we're on 4 or 5 now. But this is from 2013, and they've moved on. You can click a little button to process your payment. There's a easier to read interface. You can see the files that they've encrypted. They've actually gone out of their way to show you how screwed you are. And now we have things like this. This is an example. This is a screenshot of TeslaCrypt. And this actually, if you were to scan that, actually is a working barcode. They have like a nice UI. They even offer one free decryption in case you have like that one really important file you just absolutely have to get. And this shows that this has been successful enough. This is actually a business. This sort of thing isn't going away because it is really that successful. And it's getting easier for them to get a hold of computers because in a lot of cases users don't understand how they're getting infected. They don't understand how to protect themselves because they're still stuck in that mindset that if they avoid, shady porn sites, then they're not going to get anything nasty on their computer. When in reality, there was a lot of, a few months ago, there was a case of a flash 0-day that had been undiscovered. And you probably heard about this because it was in the news for several weeks, but researchers discovered that the CryptoWall developers had actually managed to breach a large ad network and had changed several ads, totally legitimate ads that had been sold, to be serving up CryptoWall. And then they used a flash 0-day to actually infect the machines. So there were probably in 6-figure users who just had the unlucky chance to visit websites like AOL.com and the Huffington Post and got served up a malicious Hugo Boss ad. It was just in rotation. They had Flash enabled. They weren't blocking ads. It showed up on their PC because they were reading the Huffington Post. They had CryptoWall. Just in a drive-by download. And as soon as Adobe fixed it, they stopped their campaign, and the last time I looked into it, they still hadn't quite figured out how they had breached the ad network. And they shut down as soon as that the Flash update was out, which we believe because they didn't even want to take the chance of getting a few more people that hadn't updated Flash yet. They just said, nope, we're going to wait until the next 0-day comes out and shut down. Because they knew that it was much more profitable for them in the long run to get thousands of users than to get a few hundred more who hadn't quite updated Flash yet. So they're out there waiting for opportunities like that to just kind of sweep up a whole bunch of users in a net, get them, and run off with the money. Kind of the next one I want to talk about is Snapchat. This is pretty brief because mostly it's for the next example. But I heard in a couple of talks this week, people mentioned the snapping, and there was a couple of really great talks about doxing and things like that referred to Snapchat. And the main point I want to make about Snapchat is that it's a black box service. That a lot of the people that use it don't understand anything beyond the fact that they're getting at least they think they're getting what Snapchat promises, which is a service that they send an MMS message or something, or they send a video to someone, and it'll self-destruct, which sounds pretty cool. But they don't know enough to think about what happens in between. Like, well, a server has to store this for at least some amount of time. I know that if I don't log into Snapchat for several weeks, like I can still log in and find snaps, so it must be getting stored. They don't think through all that. They just think, no, I sent it to my friend, he sees it, it blows up after 20 seconds, no one ever sees it again. A lot of people it's getting a little bit better, but I still know plenty of people who don't believe their phones can take screenshots. And even then, even if they couldn't, like, you can take another camera and take a picture of the phone. Like, that if someone really wanted that video or that picture to be shared around, they can make it happen. But people aren't thinking about that, and the companies behind a lot of these services, like this official statement from Snapchat, which they released as part of their response of the snapping, was basically, yeah, you were victimized by how you use Snapchat, so it's not our problem, sorry. And the main point I want to make here is their user base. This is from March. So this was up to date as of March of this year. This is what Snapchat shows to their advertisers. They show, and they're very proud of the fact, that 50% of their users are between the ages of 13 and 17. And then the other 31% is 18 to 24. So basically, it's about 80% of these is a bunch of kids using Snapchat, and they don't really, probably a big bulk of them don't understand how Snapchat works or what they might run into if they use it. And, you know, they have their nice stylish graph at the bottom showing that the ever-increasing number of snaps that are sent on a daily basis. So what this means is that when you do have events like the snapping, or perhaps something worse like Snapchat itself, in that case, if you weren't aware, it was a third-party service called snapsaved.com that got compromised. If Snapchat were to be compromised, though, and these 400 million snaps a day were to be compromised of, 50% of ages 13 to 17, who knows what would be in that data. And that kind of brings us to the last example, the really big one that I want to talk about, which was, this was back in April of 2014, when Central Virginia had an encounter with what's referred to by law enforcement as self-production. So that's a law enforcement term for any kind of production of pornography if you produce it yourself. And in this case, it was unfortunately a whole bunch of high school students that were taking pictures. So it was self-produced child pornography by law. Now the problem was that a mother happened to look over her daughter's shoulder while she was surfing Instagram and saw a naked picture of a girl that she recognized as one of the cheerleaders from the school. She took the phone, looked at the Instagram feed, found that there was hundreds of photos of other girls that she recognized, that she knew to be her daughter's friends. So she went to the school, she went to the police, they contacted Instagram, and they had to open up, by law, a child pornography investigation. Throughout that investigation, the Virginia police interviewed students at the school, and they were really shocked to find out that no one was really surprised. No one was distraught. Everyone was kind of like, oh, crap. I thought that might happen, but didn't think it would. And no one, so they were really confused. So they started asking, they said, okay, well, how many other students do you think have taken pictures of themselves and sent them to someone? And they said, oh, and there was ranges between 60 and 80% were the students' estimates. Now, there was a study in East Texas that showed that 31% of students had actually admitted to it on a survey, which maybe if you take into account that some people lied and that survey was restricted to freshmen and sophomores, you might be able to say that, a good third of high school students were sharing pictures with each other. When asked why they'd taken the picture, a lot of the girls that were in the picture said, oh, well, I liked this boy, so I sent him a picture. And, I was hoping he would go out with me. And they kept pushing him, and so they said, well, kind of prove it. Let me see your phone. They ended up confiscating dozens and dozens of phones. They had a whole wall in their evidence room that was just full of phones from this high school, all because they found they contained child pornography. A lot of times there was pictures of other students in the school as well as pictures of their own. And by law, they have to confiscate those. Eventually, just being too unwieldy, they said, look, we're going to stop this investigation, kind of put it on hold while we look into it further, because we don't know what to do with this. And kind of thankfully, they asked the Virginia State prosecutor, what do you want to do about this? Are we really going to prosecute basically an entire school of high schoolers for distributing child pornography? And he said, no, of course not. Of course not going to do that. So they kind of put the case on hold while they looked into it. As of a couple of weeks ago, I keep trying to look into this to see if it ever comes to a close. The closest they've gotten is they have a couple of anecdotal stories where that there was a boy at the school that was pretty popular, got a lot of pictures, shared them with a lot of the other boys at the school, and someone had the idea like, hey, we're kind of tired of sending texts to each other, and we don't want our parents to find these on our phones. We should put them up on Instagram, because they'll be safe there, and we can all access them. So we should leave it public. And they said, don't worry, you can't find anything on Instagram because you have to know the hashtag in order to find it. They didn't understand that you could just look through Instagram. They didn't understand how the service worked. So they had a special hashtag they all agreed on, like a password. And you could only get the hashtag if you shared a picture with the guy whoever it was that was uploading the photos. So it was just a gross misunderstanding of how any of this worked. They put themselves at risk, and thankfully, at least so far, we haven't really seen anything come of it. The pictures haven't been surfacing, no blackmail or anything like that, but there's always the risk of that, in 10, 20 years or so down the future, that they kind of, they put that stuff out there, you don't know how it's going to come back on them. And then not to mention that there was another case, there was a case in Ohio in 2009 that kind of demonstrates that they might have been fortunate that the entire school went through it, because the worst that these girls got was, a couple of them lost some babysitting jobs. There was some bullying for a while, but it kind of happened at the end of the school year, so there was only about a month period between when this was discovered to when they all left for summer break. So nothing tragic happened out of this, but in 2009, when there was a young girl in Ohio who was 15 or 16, and they discovered that she had sent a nude picture to a boy that she liked. He shared it with a bunch of their close friends. Didn't get very far. Definitely didn't get out to the whole school or to the public internet like these pictures did, and she killed herself because she just couldn't handle it. And that's kind of one of those risks of where they use technology. They didn't really understand it. They trusted each other when they probably shouldn't have. And these are kind of the things that this is where the education becomes really important. I think of teenagers, people who are starting to use technology like this, to be one of the most vulnerable groups when it comes to technology. On one hand, we talk a lot about how it's really awesome that we have 2-year-olds who can use an iPad and it's really, really simple. And that by the time they get to between the ages of 10 and 13, they're programming and things like that. That's great, but it also means that they're able to get out there, find services, things like this. You don't need to tell them about Snapchat, they'll find it. Because it's easy enough to find it. We've made it really, really easy to navigate around the internet. And we have, other cases as well where a lot of that curiosity is causing problems. So just recently, there was an Idaho teenager who used a DDoS for hire service to DDoS his school because he didn't want to take a test. And now he kept it going for about a week, and they discovered it because he didn't know enough to try to hide his tracks or really know what he was doing, and he's probably going to be expelled now. And there's suggestion that maybe to make an example of him, he should be charged with a felony, even though he's a minor. That maybe charge him as an adult for the felony to put it on his record. But even then, a kid trying to get out of taking a test isn't as bad as some of the other incidents we've seen. I know there's some talks that have discussed swatting as well, but so here's just a couple of headlines I've taken. Just kind of demonstrated, swatting, being used against schools. This kid just DDoSed it because he didn't want to take a test. There's kids out there actually trying to use SWAT teams to shut down the school so they don't have to take a test. Or just to troll people on the internet. And recently one of them got 5 years in prison for swatting. They just kind of threw the book at him to make an example of him. So again, we're also in a situation right now where even if they just do something stupid, they really can't get away with it like, oh, you stole something while you're a minor, so it'll go in your juvenile record. Now we're trying to make examples of them, which in one hand maybe we have to do so people will stop doing this sort of stuff. But on the other hand, we have kids who really don't know any better that we're just throwing the book at them and they're getting things like 5 years in prison. So what can we do about this? I've thrown educate out there constantly, and that really is one of the big things we can do. We can share information because that's what the bad guys do, and that's where the kids are finding a lot of the information. They go out, no one's telling them about a DDoS for hire service and what they can do with it. They're hearing about it and going and doing their own research and finding that stuff. So we can share information, especially videos like from conferences. We record all these videos, and a lot of them don't really escape the echo chamber. They just kind of get passed around on Twitter, or they just sit on YouTube, and maybe someone finds them one day and they watch them. But, don't be afraid to take a video that you really like or an article and save it. I have whole folders of bookmarks where I have different articles and videos that I like to share with people that answer certain questions really well. And even if they don't have an hour to watch the entire video, you can use YouTube to to show them exactly where they should start the video, or at least they can watch it, get a little bit more information than perhaps you can offer them at the time. If they're asking you a question, you don't have time to answer it. Maybe they have at least 15 minutes to watch the video, and they learn a little bit more than nothing at all. And that kind of also goes into releasing that knowledge from the echo chamber and collaborating, going out. If you ever thought about speaking, you don't have to speak at an InfoSec conference. You can go to a developer conference, speak to other departments at your company, all kinds of things like that. Speak at things like Hack for Kids to try to educate the kids and make them smarter and actually understand the technology, not just what it can do for them and that it's out there. Help them actually understand how it works and how it's powerful, or what happened, what can come of it. And finally, also make sure that you're using the right language for the right situation. So if you're going and constantly talking about hackers and hacking and cyber this and cyber that, just be cognizant of the fact that when you say hack, that might mean something different to the person you're talking to than what you think it means. But we also want to be mindful that we aren't oversimplifying and making really dumbing it down so they don't actually end up learning anything. So that's my talk, guys. Thank you very much. Run through it in my 2.5 minutes I have left. So I'll say if anyone has any comments, I'll go to the back of the room if anyone has any comments or questions. I was not really prepared to take any questions necessarily, but happy to talk about it. Don't have one. All right, thanks, guys.